The morning fog clung to Chicago's skyline like a shroud, and I stood at the edge of Lake Michigan, watching the city wake up to another day of secrets. My name is Jacob Jones, 32 years old, and I am a detective who carries more shadows than most. The badge on my chest says Chicago Police Department, but the real truth runs deeper than that. I work for internal affairs, a secret that weighs heavier on my soul than the gun at my hip. The call came at 6:30 a.m. sharp. "Jones, we've got a body in the Gold Coast," Rosa Alvarez said through the phone, her voice cutting through my morning coffee haze. Rosa has been my partner for 3 years now, and she doesn't know about my other job. Nobody does. That's the burden of hunting wolves among sheep. You must become one of them to catch them. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The penthouse at 1200 North Lakeshore Drive stood like a monument to wealth and power, its floor-to-ceiling windows reflecting the morning sun like golden eyes. Inside, the scene was chaos wrapped in expensive marble and silk. The victim lay sprawled across his imported Italian leather sofa, 3 gunshot wounds to the chest, blood pooling beneath him like spilled wine on white tablecloth. "Meet Thomas Hartwell," Rosa said, pulling out her notepad. 63 years old, real estate mogul, city council connections up to his eyeballs. She gestured around the lavish apartment. "Looks like someone wanted to make a statement." I knelt beside the body, studying the wound patterns. Something felt wrong about this scene, like a painting where the shadows fell in impossible directions. The struggle seemed too clean, too organized, professional. "Any witnesses?" "Buildings got security cameras, but they're conveniently malfunctioned between midnight and 3 a.m., Rosa said, her dark eyes narrowing. "Doorman was on break, concierge was in the bathroom. Perfect timing for everyone to be looking the other way." That's when Captain Marcus Doyle arrived, his presence filling the room like expensive cologne mixed with authority. Tall, silver-haired, and eyes that seemed to calculate every word before it left his mouth. To most of the department, Doyle was a father figure, a mentor who'd risen through the ranks on merit and integrity. To me, he was a question mark wrapped in a uniform. "Hell of a thing," Doyle said, surveying the scene with practiced calm. "Hartwell had his fingers in half the development projects in this city, made enemies and friends in equal measure." He looked at me directly. "What's your preliminary assessment, Jones?" I studied the evidence spread before us, the positioning of the body, the lack of defensive wounds, the pristine condition of everything except where blood had fallen. This wasn't a robbery or a crime of passion. Whoever did this knew Hartwell's routine, had access to the building, and wanted to make a statement. Rosa caught my arm as we prepared to leave. "You're thinking too hard again," she said with that half smile that made her look younger than her 30 years. "Sometimes a murder is just a murder. And sometimes it's the thread that unravels everything." What neither of us knew was that this thread would eventually wrap around my neck like a noose. The Chicago Police Department's headquarters on South Michigan Avenue buzzed with the energy of a disturbed anthill. News of Hartwell's murder had spread through the building like wildfire, and every detective, beat cop, and administrator seemed to have an opinion about who might have pulled the trigger. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. I sat at my desk, reviewing the case file for the 3rd time, when Detective Jake Mercer strutted over with his trademark smirk. Mercer came from old Chicago money. His father had been a city alderman, his grandfather a judge, and he wore his privilege like a tailored suit. Where I'd grown up dodging bullets in Englewood, he'd grown up dodging responsibility in Lincoln Park. "Still playing detective with the rich boy's murder?" Mercer asked, perching on the edge of my desk like a vulture eyeing carrion. "Maybe you should leave the thinking to people who understand how this city really works." "Enlighten me," I said, not looking up from the forensics report. "Thomas Hartwell was dirty, Jones. Real estate deals with the wrong people, kickbacks to city officials, probably laundering money for half the mob in this town." Mercer leaned closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Word is, He was about to flip on some very important people, so they shut him up permanently. Any proof of that? Mercer laughed. Proof? This is Chicago, not a courtroom. Sometimes you have to read between the lines. What Mercer didn't know was that I'd been reading between those lines for months as part of my internal affairs investigation. I'd been tracking financial irregularities in evidence processing, unexplained overtime payments, and a pattern of cases that seemed to disappear into bureaucratic black holes. All roads led back to Captain Doyle's inner circle, though I hadn't yet found the smoking gun that would prove it. That afternoon, I was called into Doyle's office. The captain's sanctuary was a shrine to 3 decades of police work. Commendations on the walls, photos with mayors and police superintendents, a flag from his Marine Corps days. But what struck me most was how clean everything was, how perfectly organized. Like a man who couldn't afford to leave evidence lying around. "Sit down, Jacob," Doyle said, using my first name with that fatherly warmth he'd perfected over the years. "I've been reviewing your preliminary report on the Hartwell case." I handed him the file folder. "Something bothers me about this murder, Captain. Too many convenient coincidences. Too clean an execution." He flipped through my notes, his expression thoughtful. "You're suggesting this was an inside job? I'm suggesting we shouldn't rule it out." "Jacob, you're a good detective, but you have a tendency to see conspiracies where there might just be competent criminals." He closed the file and leaned back in his chair. "Thomas Hartwell was involved with dangerous people. Victor Hale's organization, for instance. Sometimes the obvious answer is the correct one. So we're just going to assume Hale ordered the hit?" He said firmly, "We're going to follow the evidence wherever it leads, but we're also going to remember that this department has a reputation to maintain. Wild theories about internal corruption don't serve anyone's interests." As I left his office, I felt the weight of his words settling on my shoulders like a heavy coat. Doyle was warning me off, politely but clearly. The question was whether he was protecting the department's reputation or his own interests. That night, in a warehouse on the south side that smelled of rust and old secrets, Captain Doyle met with Victor Hale. I wasn't there to witness this conversation, but I would learn about it later, when the truth finally crawled out of its hiding place like a spider from a crack in the wall.
"The detective is asking too many questions," Doyle said, his voice echoing in the empty space. Hale, a man who'd built his empire on violence and fear, smiled like a shark sensing blood in the water. "Then maybe it's time he stopped asking questions altogether. It needs to look clean, natural, an arrest, a conviction, case closed." "Leave that to me," Hale replied. "I have everything we need to make Detective Jacob Jones disappear into the system he spent his life serving." What they didn't know was that I'd been preparing for this moment my entire career. Every corrupt cop I'd investigated, every dirty deal I'd uncovered, every sleepless night spent building cases against the wolves in sheep's clothing, it had all led to this. They thought they were setting a trap for a simple detective. They were actually cornering a hunter. The call came at dawn, 3 days after Hartwell's murder. I was drinking coffee and reading case files when my phone buzzed with Rosa's number. "Jacob, you need to get down here now," she said, her voice tight with something I couldn't identify. "There's been a development." When I walked into headquarters, the atmosphere felt different. Conversations stopped as I passed. Eyes followed me down hallways where I'd walked freely for years. The sensation was like wearing a shirt that no longer fit, constricting and uncomfortable. Rosa met me at my desk, her face pale. "Jacob, they found new evidence in the Hartwell case." "What kind of evidence?" She pulled out a plastic evidence bag containing what looked like a coffee cup. "Your fingerprints were on this mug found at Hartwell's penthouse, and there's security footage from a building across the street showing someone matching your description entering Hartwell's building the night of the murder." The words hit me like physical blows. I stared at the evidence bag, knowing I'd never seen that coffee mug before in my life. "Rosa, I know I was never at Hartwell's place. You know that." "I know what I want to believe, but the evidence The evidence is fabricated, I said, perhaps too loudly because several nearby officers turned to stare. Detective Mercer appeared beside us like a bad omen. Well, well, looks like our boy detective has some explaining to do. He gestured toward Captain Doyle's office. The captain wants to see you, Jones, now. The walk to Doyle's office felt like a march to the gallows. Inside, Doyle sat behind his desk with the expression of a man delivering bad news to a favorite son. Across from him sat Lieutenant Patricia Haze from Internal Affairs. My actual supervisor, though she didn't know I was in the room as both suspect and investigator. Jacob, sit down, Doyle said heavily. This is difficult for all of us. Lieutenant Haze opened a file folder. Detective Jones, new evidence has come to light linking you to the murder of Thomas Hartwell. Your fingerprints on items at the scene, surveillance footage showing someone matching your description entering Hartwell's building the night of the murder. I felt the room spinning slightly. The irony was suffocating. I was being investigated by my own department. This is impossible. I've never been to Hartwell's apartment. The evidence suggests otherwise, Hayes continued. Until we can sort this out, you're suspended pending a full investigation. Suspended? The word came out strangled. Doyle leaned forward with what appeared to be genuine concern. Jacob, I've known you for 5 years. This doesn't make sense to me either, but we have to follow procedure. Turn in your badge and weapon. As I handed over my service pistol and police identification, I felt pieces of my life crumbling like old newspaper. The badge that had been my identity, the gun that had been my protection, gone. All that remained was the truth, and apparently no one wanted to hear it. One more thing, Lieutenant Hayes said as I reached the door. You're not to leave the city. We may have additional questions.
Outside Doyle's office, Rosa waited with tears in her eyes. Jacob, tell me you didn't do this. I didn't kill Thomas Hartwell, I said, meeting her gaze directly. Someone is setting me up, and they're doing a damn good job of it. Then who? And why? That was the question that would keep me awake for the next several nights. Who had the resources to plant evidence, manipulate surveillance footage, and orchestrate a frame job this sophisticated? The list of suspects with that kind of power was short and terrifying. As I cleaned out my desk, ignoring the stares and whispered conversations around me, I realized that my real investigation was just beginning. Someone wanted Jacob Jones, police detective, out of the picture. But they'd forgotten about the other Jacob Jones, the internal affairs operative who'd spent years learning how to catch corrupt cops. The hunter was about to become the hunted, but I'd been preparing for this war my entire career. I should have seen the arrest warrant coming, but paranoia and preparation are different animals entirely. When Rosa called at 2 in the morning, her voice shaking with urgency, I was already half-dressed and calculating escape routes. Jacob, they're coming for you. Mercer's leading a team to your apartment. They've got an arrest warrant. I looked around my small apartment in Bridgeport, the same neighborhood where I'd grown up, where broken streetlights cast long shadows and sirens were as common as church bells. Everything I owned could fit in 2 suitcases, but right now I needed to travel lighter than that. How long do I have? Maybe 20 minutes if you're lucky. I grabbed my go bag. Every cop worth his salt keeps one, though most never expect to use it for themselves. Cash, fake identification documents I'd confiscated from previous cases, a burner phone, and a .38 special that wasn't registered to my name. The tools of survival in a city that had just declared war on me. The fire escape outside my window led down into an alley that connected to a maze of back streets I'd known since childhood. As I climbed down the rusty metal stairs, I could hear sirens approaching from the north. My timing had been perfect, but perfection in escape only lasts until the first mistake. 20 minutes later, I was sitting in an all-night diner on the south side, watching the morning news report on the small television mounted above the coffee machine. My police department photograph filled the screen, while a news anchor with perfectly styled hair described me as a person of interest in the murder of prominent businessman Thomas Hartwell. Person of interest. That was media speak for guilty until proven innocent. My phone buzzed with a text message from a number I recognized but hadn't expected. My sister Samantha. Channel 7 News, call me, now. I used the diner's payphone to dial her number, feeling like a criminal from an old movie. When Sam answered, her voice carried all the frustration and fear I'd heard when we were kids and I'd come home with bloody knuckles from street fights. Jacob, what the hell is going on? The news is saying you killed someone. I didn't kill anyone, Sam. Someone is setting me up. Setting you up? For murder? Who would... She paused, and I could hear her sharp legal mind processing information. Where are you? It's better if you don't know. Bullshit. You're my brother, and right now you need help whether you admit it or not. Samantha Jones ran a legal aid clinic in our old neighborhood, fighting for people the system had forgotten or abandoned. She was 2 years younger than me, but had always possessed a moral clarity that made her seem older. Where I'd chosen to fight corruption from the inside the system, she battled it from the outside with lawsuits and righteous anger. An hour later, I was sitting in the back room of her clinic, surrounded by legal files and the smell of strong coffee. Sam paced back and forth like a caged tiger, her long black hair tied back in a practical ponytail, her brown eyes flashing with anger.
"Start from the beginning," she said. "Tell me everything." So I did. I told her about Thomas Hartwell's murder, about the evidence that had appeared like magic, about Captain Doyle's warnings and Detective Mercer's accusations. What I didn't tell her was about my internal affairs assignment, because that secret could get her killed if the wrong people learned she possessed it. "Someone with serious resources is targeting you," she concluded after I finished my story. "This isn't some street criminal trying to get revenge. This is institutional." I know. Do you? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're playing defense when you should be playing offense. She sat down across from me, her expression intense. "Jacob, you're a good detective. If someone is framing you, there has to be evidence of the frame job. Find it." "With what resources?" "I'm suspended, Sam. No badge, no access to files, no forensics lab." "You have me. You have your brain. And you have 32 years of experience navigating this city's underbelly." She leaned forward. "Who benefits from you being out of the picture?" That was the million-dollar question. As I sat in my sister's legal aid clinic, watching the morning sun paint shadows across the walls, I began to understand that this wasn't just about Thomas Hartwell's murder. Someone had been planning this for months, maybe longer. They'd studied my habits, learned my routines, identified my vulnerabilities. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They thought I was just a detective. They didn't know I was also a hunter, trained to track corruption through the labyrinth of police bureaucracy. And hunters, when cornered, become the most dangerous creatures of all. Outside, I could hear the city waking up to another day of secrets and lies. But for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something other than despair. I felt angry, and anger, properly channeled, is the beginning of justice. The meeting with Angela Tran happened in Grant Park, near the fountain where pigeons gathered to steal crumbs from tourists' lunches. She was a small woman, with sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, someone who'd spent 5 years in the police forensics lab, being overlooked and underestimated. That invisibility, it turned out, was about to become my salvation. "I shouldn't be here," Angela said, sitting on the bench beside me while pretending to read a paperback novel. "If anyone sees us talking, they'll what, frame you for murder too?" She glanced at me nervously. "Detective Jones, I've been analyzing evidence for this department for 5 years. I know what legitimate forensics look like, and I know when something's been manufactured." My pulse quickened. "The coffee mug with my fingerprints?" "The prints are yours," she said quietly. "But they weren't left on that mug naturally. Someone lifted them from another surface and transferred them. The ridge patterns show compression marks that only occurred during artificial application." "Can you prove that?" "I documented it in my preliminary lab notes, but those notes have a funny way of disappearing around here when they contradict the official narrative." She reached into her purse and pulled out a small flash drive. "Lucky for you, I keep backup copies of everything." I took the drive, feeling like I was holding a piece of my future. "What about the surveillance footage?" "That's not my department, but I know someone who looked at it. Frame rate anomalies, digital compression artifacts that suggest editing. Whoever put this together was good, but they weren't perfect." "Who authorized the forensics work on the Hartwell case?" Angela's expression darkened. "Captain Doyle personally expedited the evidence processing. He wanted everything analyzed within 24 hours, which is unusual for a case that wasn't obviously connected to terrorism or kidnapping." The pieces were falling into place like cards from a rigged deck. Doyle hadn't just been protecting his reputation, he'd been orchestrating my destruction from the beginning. The question was, why Jacob Jones specifically? What had I done or discovered that made me dangerous enough to frame for murder?
"There's something else," Angela continued. "The murder weapon. A .38 caliber pistol found in a dumpster 2 blocks from your apartment. It came from an evidence locker that only senior officers have access to." "Which senior officers?" "Captain Doyle, Lieutenant Haze from Internal Affairs, and Detective Sergeant Morrison from Gang Intelligence." She paused. "But the access log shows the weapon was checked out 3 days before Hartwell's murder." 3 days. Someone had been planning this frame job before Thomas Hartwell was even dead, which meant either they'd known when he would be killed or they'd planned his murder around the frame job. Either possibility pointed to corruption at the highest levels of the department. As Angela prepared to leave, she turned back to me with genuine concern in her eyes. "Detective Jones, be careful who you trust. This conspiracy involves people with the power to make you disappear permanently." After she left, I sat by the fountain processing everything I'd learned. The evidence against me wasn't just fabricated, it was sophisticated, requiring resources and access that only someone inside the police hierarchy could provide. Captain Doyle had the means and opportunity, but I still needed to understand his motive. That's when I remembered something from my internal affairs files. Thomas Hartwell had been scheduled to meet with federal investigators the week after his murder. The meeting topic was listed as irregularities in city development contracts, which was bureaucratic language for bribes, kickbacks, and corruption. Hartwell hadn't been killed by Victor Hale's criminal organization. He'd been killed to prevent him from exposing the police officials who'd been protecting Hale's operations for years. And I'd been framed not because of any specific investigation, but because someone suspected I was getting too close to the truth. My phone buzzed with a text from Rosa. "They're expanding the manhunt. Federal marshals now involved. Whatever you're planning, do it fast." I looked out across Grant Park, watching ordinary people living ordinary lives, unaware that the police department sworn to protect them was rotten to its core. But corruption, like cancer, could be cut out if you knew where to find it and had the courage to wield the knife. Angela Tron had given me the scalpel. Now I needed to find the tumor. The war between Jacob Jones the detective and Jacob Jones the internal affairs operative was about to end. What would emerge from that battle was something new. A man with nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. In Chicago, that was the most dangerous kind of enemy. The Chicago Public Library's archives smelled of old paper and forgotten secrets. Samantha and I had been there for 3 hours, poring over real estate records, court documents, and newspaper clippings that painted a picture of Thomas Hartwell's business empire. What we found made my blood run cold. "Look at this," Sam said, sliding a property deed across the table. "Hartwell's company bought 12 parcels of land in Inglewood over the past 2 years, all from different sellers, all at below-market prices." I studied the documents. Those parcels formed a perfect rectangle. Someone was assembling land for a major development project. "And look who expedited the zoning permits," she pointed to a city planning document stamped with official seals. "Victor Hale's construction company was set to break ground next month on a casino and entertainment complex." The pieces clicked together like bullets sliding into a magazine. Hartwell was buying land for Hale, probably using laundered money to make the purchases appear legitimate. But something had gone wrong. Maybe Hartwell had grown greedy, or maybe he'd grown a conscience. Either way, he'd become a liability.
There's more, Sam continued, pulling out a manila folder thick with legal papers. Hartwell filed a complaint with the FBI's Organized Crime Task Force 3 weeks ago. He was going to testify about police protection of Hale's operations.
Which police officers? The complaint names Detective Sergeant Morrison, Lieutenant Haze, and, she paused, her face growing pale, Captain Marcus Doyle. I felt the floor shift beneath me. Lieutenant Haze was my actual supervisor in internal affairs. If she was involved in this conspiracy, then my entire investigation had been compromised from the beginning. Every report I'd filed, every piece of evidence I'd gathered, Doyle would have known about all of it. My phone buzzed with an unknown number. When I answered, a gravelly voice I didn't recognize spoke with quiet menace. "You're digging in the wrong graveyard, Detective Jones." "Who is this?" "Someone who knows where you're sitting right now. Someone who knows your sister works late at her clinic on Thursdays. Someone who thinks you should stop asking questions before the wrong people get hurt." The line went dead. I looked around the library, suddenly aware of every face, every movement. In the corner, a man in a baseball cap lowered his newspaper and walked toward the exit. "We need to leave," I told Sam. "Now." As we gathered the documents, my mind raced through the implications. If Hale's people were tracking us, it meant the conspiracy was bigger than I imagined. This wasn't just about framing one detective. It was about protecting a criminal empire that reached into the highest levels of law enforcement. We left through the library's back exit, but I could feel eyes watching us from the shadows. The black sedan that followed us for 6 blocks confirmed my fears. We were walking into a war zone, and the enemy knew exactly where we were. That night, in a safe house Rosa had arranged in Chinatown, I finally understood the scope of what we were facing. Victor Hale hadn't just corrupted individual officers. He'd built a network of protection that included internal affairs, gang intelligence, and the upper command structure. My investigation hadn't just stumbled onto corruption, it had threatened to expose the entire system. "They're going to kill us," Sam said quietly, staring out the window at the neon-lit street below. "Not if I kill them first," I replied, checking the ammunition in my .38. But killing wasn't the answer. Exposure was. And for that, I needed proof that would stand up in federal court. Evidence so damning that not even Doyle's connections could make it disappear. The problem was getting close enough to gather that evidence without ending up like Thomas Hartwell. The meeting with Rosa happened in an all-night diner on the north side, the kind of place where truck drivers and insomniacs gathered to avoid going home to empty apartments. She slid into the booth across from me, her eyes red with exhaustion and worry. "Jacob, half the department thinks you're a cop killer. The other half thinks you're dead. Which one is true?" "Neither." I stirred the coffee, gathering courage for the conversation that would change everything between us. "Rosa, there's something I need to tell you. Something that might make you hate me." "Try me." "I work for Internal Affairs. Have for the past 18 months. My assignment was to investigate corruption in the department, specifically in Captain Doyle's unit." The silence stretched between us like a frozen lake, dangerous and fragile. Rosa's expression cycled through disbelief, hurt, and finally a cold anger that made her look like a stranger. "Internal Affairs," she repeated slowly. "You've been spying on me. On all of us." "Not spying, investigating. There's a difference." "Is there?" She leaned back in the booth, studying me like evidence at a crime scene. "How long have you known about my gambling problem? About the money I borrowed from the wrong people?" I met her eyes directly. "I know you bet on basketball games. I know you're 3 months behind on payments to a bookie named Sal Torino. And I know you've never once let that compromise your integrity as a police officer. So why didn't you report it?"
Because being human isn't a crime, Rosa. Being corrupt is. I reached across the table, but she pulled her hands away.
The people I'm after, Doyle, Morrison, Haze, they're not just taking bribes. They're protecting murderers, drug dealers, and human traffickers. They've turned our badge into a license to look the other way. Rosa was quiet for a long moment, processing the revelation. When she spoke again, her voice was softer but still wary. If you're internal affairs, why are you telling me this? Why not just call in federal backup? Because I don't know who else is involved. Because the conspiracy goes higher than I thought. And because... I paused, realizing I was about to cross a line I'd never crossed before. Because I trust you, and right now you're the only person I can say that about. She studied my face in the dim diner light, searching for lies or manipulation. What she found, apparently, was something she could live with. What do you need from me? Access to Doyle's office, his personal files, his computer, anything that might connect him to Hale's operation. That's breaking and entering, career suicide. Rosa, my career is already dead. The question is whether we're going to let the people who killed it get away with it. She was quiet for another long moment. Then she reached into her purse and pulled out a key card. Doyle's office. I copied it last week when I started suspecting something was wrong. I stared at the card, understanding what it represented. Rosa wasn't just helping me. She was betting her entire future on my word that the system we'd both served was rotten to its core. There's no coming back from this, I warned her. Good, she said with a bitter smile. I was getting tired of pretending everything was fine anyway. The police headquarters at midnight felt like a mausoleum, empty hallways echoing with the ghosts of justice denied. Rosa had created a distraction by calling in a fake tip about suspicious activity on the south side, pulling most of the night shift away from the building. But we still had maybe 30 minutes before someone noticed the deception. Doyle's office was on the third floor, behind a door marked with his name and 30 years of accumulated authority. The key card Rosa had provided worked perfectly, and we slipped inside like shadows made flesh. The office looked different in the darkness, less impressive, more vulnerable. While Rosa kept watch at the door, I powered up Doyle's computer and began searching through his files. What I found exceeded my worst expectations. Bank records showing regular deposits from shell companies connected to Victor Hale. Email correspondence discussing evidence management and witness reliability. Photos of meetings between Doyle and known members of Hale's organization. And most damning of all, a detailed plan for framing me that had been in development for 3 months. They knew, I whispered, downloading files onto a portable drive. How? Lieutenant Haze. She's been feeding information to Doyle about my investigation. I scrolled through more emails, each one a nail in the coffin of my former faith in the system. They planned Hartwell's murder around my frame-up, not the other way around. Rosa checked her watch. We need to go. Security rounds start in 10 minutes. But I wasn't finished. In Doyle's desk drawer, I found a burner phone with text messages that chilled my blood. Coordinates for my sister's legal clinic. Surveillance photos of Rosa's apartment. Plans for permanent solutions to the Jacob Jones problem. I said, showing Rosa the messages. They're going to kill us. Then we better make sure they don't get the chance. As we prepared to leave, I heard footsteps in the hallway outside, heavy boots on linoleum, moving with purpose. Rosa and I exchanged glances, both understanding that our 30-minute window had just slammed shut. The footsteps stopped outside Doyle's office. A key turned in the lock.
Captain Doyle stepped into his office, his hand already reaching for his service weapon. But he wasn't expecting to find us armed and ready. The standoff lasted maybe 5 seconds, though it felt like hours. "Hello, Marcus," I said quietly. "Working late tonight?" "Jacob." His voice carried no surprise, only resignation. "I'd hoped you were smarter than this. Smart enough to know you've been selling badges to the highest bidder." Doyle's smile was cold and mechanical. "You have no idea what you're dealing with, son. Victor Hale doesn't just buy protection, he owns people, body and soul. And what did he buy you with? My daughter's life." The admission came out flat and emotionless. Leukemia. Experimental treatments in Switzerland. Do you know what that costs, Jacob? More than a police captain makes in 10 lifetimes. For a moment, I felt something approaching sympathy. Then I remembered Thomas Hartwell's body, my destroyed career, the terror in my sister's voice. There were other ways, Marcus. Were there? You think the system cares about one sick girl when there's money to be made? He laughed bitterly. You're more naive than I thought. The conversation ended when Rosa stepped behind him and pressed her gun to the base of his skull. "Drop your weapon, Captain. Now!" The warehouse district near the Chicago River had always been a place where the city's sins came to die. Abandoned buildings stretched for blocks, their broken windows staring out like dead eyes. It was here that Victor Hale had chosen to make his final stand. The text message had been simple. "Bring the files. Come alone. Your sister's life depends on it." But I wasn't alone. Rosa followed 50 yards behind, and Angela Tran was positioned with federal agents on the building's perimeter. After our confrontation with Doyle, we'd finally contacted the FBI. The evidence we'd gathered was too damning to ignore, even for a federal bureaucracy notoriously reluctant to investigate police corruption. Inside the warehouse, Victor Hale waited with the patience of a man who'd never lost a war. He was smaller than I'd expected, with gray hair and the kind of quiet intensity that made strong men nervous. Beside him stood Detective Jake Mercer, looking uncomfortable in his role as hired muscle. "Detective Jones," Hale said pleasantly, "you have caused me considerable inconvenience. Where is my sister?" "She's safe, for now." He gestured to a chair that had been placed in the center of the empty space. "Please sit. We have business to discuss." "The business is over, Hale. The FBI has everything: bank records, communications, witness testimony. Your protection network is finished." Hale's smile never wavered. "Is it? You assume federal agents can't be bought, that judges can't be influenced, that evidence can't disappear? You have more faith in the system than I do." "Maybe, but I have more faith in people." That's when Rosa appeared from the shadows behind Mercer, her gun drawn and steady. "FBI, nobody move!" The warehouse erupted into chaos. Mercer spun toward Rosa, reaching for his weapon. I dove for cover behind a concrete pillar as gunfire echoed through the empty space. But the shooting stopped almost as quickly as it had started. When the smoke cleared, Mercer was on the ground, clutching a wounded shoulder. Hale stood with his hands raised, surrounded by federal agents who'd entered through a dozen different entrances. "It's over," I said, walking toward him. "Is it?" Hale smiled one last time. "I've been playing this game for 30 years, Detective. You think one arrest will end it? There are 10 Victor Hales waiting to take my place, and 100 Marcus Doyles ready to be bought." He was probably right. Correction was like water. Cut off one stream, and it found another path. But for today, for this moment, justice had won a small victory. As federal agents led Hale away in handcuffs, I found my sister tied up in a back room, angry but unharmed. The relief of seeing her safe nearly brought me to my knees. "Are you okay?"
"I'm fine," Sam said, rubbing circulation back into her wrists. "But Jacob, this isn't over. Hale's organization has roots throughout the city. Taking down one man won't be enough." She was right, of course. But sometimes justice comes in small victories, one corrupt official at a time. 3 months later, I stood in the same spot where Thomas Hartwell had died, looking out over Lake Michigan as the sun set behind the Chicago skyline. The penthouse had been cleaned and renovated, all traces of violence erased. But I could still see the bloodstains in my memory, still feel the weight of the frame-up that had nearly destroyed my life. Captain Marcus Doyle was serving 15 years in federal prison. Victor Hale had been sentenced to life without parole. Lieutenant Haze and Detective Sergeant Morrison were awaiting trial on charges ranging from conspiracy to murder. The corruption network had been shattered, though new ones would inevitably rise to take its place. I'd been officially reinstated to the Chicago Police Department with full honors and a commendation for my undercover work. The internal affairs assignment was over, replaced by a new role in a joint federal-local task force dedicated to police corruption. No more secrets, no more hiding in shadows. Rosa had been promoted to sergeant and assigned as my new partner in the task force. The trust between us had been damaged by my deception, but it was slowly healing. Some wounds take time. "You coming to Molly's tonight?" she asked, appearing beside me in the empty penthouse. "The whole unit's going to be there." "Maybe later." I continued staring out at the lake, watching boats dot the water like white stars against blue velvet. "I need some time to think." "About what?" "About whether I can do this job anymore. Whether I want to." Rosa was quiet for a moment. "Jacob, what we did, exposing Doyle, bringing down Hale, that matters. We made a difference." "Did we? Or did we just clear space for the next generation of corruption?" "Maybe both." She put a hand on my shoulder. "But that's not a reason to quit. That's a reason to keep fighting." After she left, I remained alone in the penthouse as darkness fell over the city. Somewhere out there, new conspiracies were being born, new betrayals planned, new innocence framed. The war between good and evil was eternal, fought one case at a time by people who chose to care when it would be easier not to. My phone buzzed with a text from Samantha. "Proud of you, big brother. Don't let the darkness win." I wouldn't. Tomorrow I would return to the streets of Chicago, hunting wolves among the sheep. Some of those wolves wore badges, some wore suits, some were the faces of I trusted. But I would find them, one by one, and drag them into the light. Because that's what hunters do. We never stop hunting. The city spread out below me like a vast game board, each light a life, each shadow a secret. And somewhere in that maze of concrete and steel, justice waited to be served. I was ready to serve it.
Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.